Let's take a look at this question where we want to define a class called car rent with the following data members and methods. Here we only have two data members. These are our instance variables that we need to create in the beginning of our class. We have a variable called numDays of the int data type, which is going to be storing the number of days a car is rented. We have another variable called total AMT, again of the int data type, which is going to store the total cost for the car rented. So here we have two methods. We have our input method to input and store the necessary details in the variables. Here we just need to input the number of days the car was rented. Then we have the AMT method to calculate the total cost for the car rented. We're going to do that using this table. If you see, for the first 10 days, the cost per day is 100 rupees. For the first 20 days, the cost per day is 80 rupees. And above 30 days, the cost per day is going to be 70 rupees. Using the AMT method, we're going to calculate the total cost of the car rented and we're going to store the total amount in this variable total AMT. Using this print method, we're going to print the total cost for the car. Finally, we need to use a main method to create an object of this class and call the methods of the class. Here, I'm going to create my class called car rent. And inside my class, I'm going to first create the data members or the instance variables. We have our numDays variable of the int data type. So I'm going to say int numDays. And then we have our variable total AMT, again of the int data type. So I'm going to say int total AMT. The numDays variable is going to store the number of days the car was rented. And a total AMT variable is going to store the total amount for renting the car. Now I'm going to create my input method to store the necessary details in the variables. You can see that this input method has no return data type. So I'm just going to say public void input. And in this method, we're going to take the number of days as input. Since we're taking something as input, we need to use the scanner class. So here, before I even create this class, I'm going to import the util package which contains the scanner class. And after we create these instance variables, I'm going to create my scanner class object. So I'm going to create the scanner class object and I'm going to call this maybe something like SC. And I'll set this to new scanner and then our input stream, so system.in. Here we can use this object SC of the scanner class to take the number of days as input. Inside this input method, I'm going to first add a println statement. I'm going to ask the user to enter the number of days. Then once the user enters the number of days, we need to store it in this variable called numDays. And I'm going to set this variable numDays to sc.nextInt. Using this scanner class object sc, I'm going to call the nextInt method, and whatever value that the user enters for the number of days, I'm storing it in this variable numDays. Before I create this AMT method, we'll try to figure out how we can calculate the total cost for the car rented. If you look at this table, it's telling us that for the first 10 days you're renting the car, the cost per day is going to be 100 rupees. For the next 20 days, the cost per day is going to be 80 rupees. And above 30 days, the cost per day is going to be 70 rupees. Let's say that the person rents the car for something like 60 days. Now you might initially think that according to this condition, because it says that above 30 days, the cost per day would be 70 rupees. Since 60 is above 30, the cost per day should be 70 rupees. And the total cost would just be 70 rupees times 60 days. But this is wrong. This is not actually what happens. When a person rents the car, initially the number of days would just be 0. So you're starting at 0 days. And let's say that the person rents the car for 10 more days. So now from 0 days, the number of days would increase to 10 days. The person rents the car for 10 days. Our condition clearly tells us that for the first 10 days, the cost per day would be 100 rupees. So here, for these first 10 days that the person rents the car, the cost per day would be rupees 100. Then let's say that the person rents the car for 5 more days. So from 10 we would increase to 15 because the person rented the car for 5 more days. Here you notice that since our condition tells us that the cost per day for the next 20 days is 80 rupees per day, for these next 5 days, the cost per day is going to be rupees 80. Now, let's say that after these 15 days, the person decides to use the car even more. So he rents the car for 15 more days. So now he's going to rent a car for a total of 30 days. The condition tells us that after this 10th day, he is renting the car for 20 more days. You can see using this table that for the first 10 days, the cost per day was 100 rupees. And for the next 20 days, the cost per day is 80 rupees. So here, for these next 20 days, the cost per day would be rupees 80. What happens if the person rents the car even more? So after the 30th day, the person decides to use the car for, let's say, 7 more days. So the number of days would increase from 30 to 37. This would be 7 more days. Here, for these 7 days, since the number of days is above 30 days, so we've crossed 30, the number of days is above 30, the cost per day would be rupees 70. The important thing I like you to notice is that the cost per day is changing as the number of days keep increasing. Here, if I want to find a total amount, you can see that the total amount will be equal to the first 10 days, the cost per day was 100 rupees, so 10 times rupees 100. For these 20 days, the cost per day was 80 rupees, so 20 times rupees 80. And then for these 7 more days, the cost per day was rupees 70. So 7 times rupees 70 is going to give us the total amount for these 7 days. This would be the total amount for all the 37 days. And now if you look at this information, you should notice a few obvious cases. If the number of days, which is stored in our numDays variable, if this is lesser than or equal to 10, since for the first 10 days, the cost per day is rupees 100, the total cost would just be the number of days times rupees 100. Now let's say that the number of days, so the variable numDays is between 10 and 30. So it's greater than 10 and the number of days or numDays is lesser than or equal to 30. If it's between 10 and 30, you can see that for the first 10 days, you're going to have a cost per day of rupees 100. For the remaining days, you're going to have a cost per day of rupees 80. So here, if I take something like 25 days, this is definitely between 10 and 30. For the first 10 days, we will have a cost per day of rupees 100. And for the remaining days, so that's 25 minus 10, for the remaining 15 days, we're going to have a cost per day of rupees 80. So here I can say that if the number of days is between 10 and 30, the total amount or the total cost for renting the car would just be equal to 10 times rupees 100 plus the remaining days is just the total days that we took as input minus 10 days. Since we already counted the cost for 10 days, we're just subtracting 10. That's our remaining days. The remaining days has a cost per day of rupees 80. So we're going to multiply this with rupees 80. And this would give us the total amount if the number of days was between 10 and 30. Now let's say that numDays is greater than 30. Here, the number of days was 37. That's the total number of days. And when the number of days was 37, we can see that for the first 10 days, since the cost per day is rupees 100, the total amount for the first 10 days is 10 times rupees 100. It's 1000 rupees. For the next 20 days, the cost per day has changed. It's now 80 rupees. So the total cost for renting the car for the next 20 days is 20 times rupees 80. And finally for the remaining days, so that's 37 minus 30. The remaining days is 7 days. The cost per day is rupees 70. So here as well, if the number of days is greater than 30, for the first 10 days, the cost per day is rupees 100. So the total cost would be 10 times rupees 100. For the next 20 days, we can see that the cost per day is rupees 80. So we're going to add 20 times rupees 80. This is giving us the total amount for the first 30 days. We're still left with a few more days because the number of days is greater than 30. So I'm going to say that the remaining days, so that's the total number of days in our num days variable minus 30. This is giving us our remaining days. Above 30 days, since the cost per day is rupees 70, for the remaining days, the cost per day would also be rupees 70. So I'm going to multiply this with rupees 70 to get the total cost for the remaining days. So here we have three conditions. If the number of days is lesser than or equal to 10, if the number of days is between 10 and 30, and finally if the number of days is greater than 30. In our program, we can use if statements to implement these three conditions. So here I'm going to create my amount method to calculate the total amount. And we're going to first check if the number of days is lesser than or equal to 10. That's our first condition. If the number of days is lesser than or equal to 10, we can see that the total cost is just equal to the total number of days times 100 because the cost per day would be rupees 100. So I'm going to set my total amount variable to the total number of days times 100. Then we're going to check if the number of days is between 10 and 30. So if the number of days is greater than 10 and if the number of days is lesser than or equal to 30. If we're between 10 and 30, the total cost would be 10 times rupees 100 for the first 10 days plus the remaining days, so that's the total number of days minus 10 times rupees 80. So we're going to set the total amount variable to just this, 10 times 100 to give us the cost for the first 10 days plus the remaining days is just the total number of days minus 10. For the remaining days, the cost per day is rupees 80. So we're going to multiply this with 80. And this is going to give us the total cost if the number of days was between 10 and 30. Finally, we're going to check if the number of days was greater than 30. Above 30, you can see that for the first 10 days, the cost per day is rupees 100. So 10 times 100 would be the total cost for the first 10 days. For the next 20 days, the cost per day is rupees 80. So 20 times rupees 80 would be the total cost for the next 20 days. The remaining days would be the total number of days. So that's a variable num days minus 30 times 70 rupees because above 30 days, the cost per day would be 70 rupees. So here we're going to set our total amount variable to 10 times 100. That's the cost for the first 10 days plus 20 times 80, our cost for the next 20 days plus the total number of days minus 30, the remaining days times 70. This is going to give us the total cost if the number of days was greater than 30. And with that, we created our AMD method as well. After this, we need to create our print method. So I'm going to say public void print, and in our brackets we're just gonna print the total cost for the car rented. So I'm gonna add a println statement and I'm gonna print that the total cost is whatever stored in our total AMT variable. Finally, we need to create a main method to create the object of this class and call these methods. So I'm going to create the main method over here, public static void main, and once we create this main method, I'm going to create the object of this car rent class. To create the object, I need to write the name of the class first. So that's car rent. We'll call this object car1 and we'll set this to new car rent. We're creating a new object of this car rent class. Using this car1 object, we're going to first call the input method. So I'm going to say car1 dot input. Then we're going to call our AMD method to calculate the total amount. And finally, we're just going to call our print method to print the total amount for renting the car. Now let's just run this program. And you can see that it asks me to enter the number of days. Let's enter 37. Before I click enter, let's try to predict what the output is going to be. We already saw that if the car was rented for 37 days, the total amount would be 10 times rupees 100 for the first 10 days, plus 20 times rupees 80 for the next 20 days, plus 7 times rupees 70 for the remaining 7 days. This is just going to be rupees 1000 plus rupees 1600 plus rupees 490. The total amount would just be rupees 3090. You can see that when I click enter, it does print that the total cost for renting the car for 37 days is 3090.